If you're a fan of Lord of the Rings, you know about Galadriel. The powerful elf known as the Lady of the Golden Wood gave Gimli 3 strands of her hair, something she once refused to give to Fëanor, the elf who created the Silmarils. Many called her a witch, but in reality she was firmly on the side of the free people of Middle Earth and even carried one of the Rings of Power. Elrond, the Lord of Rivendell, and the elf who created the Fellowship of the Ring was her son-in-law. Arwen, who became the Queen of Gondor, was her granddaughter. And while Legolas wasn't directly related to her, many other prominent figures in the history of Middle Earth and Valinor were. Perhaps it's time to look deeper into who Galadriel of Lothlórien comes from and where her lineage goes, until it becomes a part of the royal line of the Men of Gondor in Return of the King. Before we get into this explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Now, let's begin with Finwë, grandfather of Galadriel. Finwë was the first king of Noldor, and he was killed by Melkor. His son, Fëanor, was the creator of the Silmarillions, or the Gems of Light, which led to him and his brothers fighting badly enough that Fëanor was exiled. Out of love for his child, Finwë went with him, which unfortunately led to his death. Finwë is known for a lot, including taking the elves of Noldor to Aman or Valinor for the first time, and trying to keep the Noldor on the path of the Valar, something he failed at due to the influence of Melkor. Finwë was married twice, and his second wife was the grandmother of Galadriel, named Indis. Known for her great beauty, Indis was the second wife of Finwë, yes, but she was also the niece of the High King of the Elves of Valinor. She bore several children, but due to the actions of her stepson, who had no love for her, she lost her husband, Finwë. Then, Indis returned to her people, aka the Elves of Valinor, with her eldest daughter, until the Valar restored her husband's life. Her younger daughter and her son, Fingolfin, went into exile. Her other son fathered Galadriel of Lothlórien, so perhaps it's time to take a look at Finarfin, the son of Indis. A Noldorian elf in Valinor, Finarfin was called the wisest and most beautiful of all the sons Finwë had, making him one of the most powerful elves in Middle-earth. They were also unique in another way. Thanks to Indis, who was of Vanerian descent, Finarfin and his children, and their children after them, had golden hair, something that was at the time unique amongst the Noldor. Their house was thusly named the Golden House of Finarfin. Wonder how Elrond has dark hair then? Well, we'll get to that. Finarfin has an interesting history. When his brother, the notorious Fëanor, set into motion the events that would lead to the doom of Noldor, he urged his people caution. When that didn't work, he departed with his brothers to Middle-earth, but turned back when the doom of Noldor was announced. Thus, he and his were pardoned by the Valar from the doom of Noldor. He then became king of Noldor in Aman, a position many think he still holds, along with his wife, Éowyn, who was related to King Thingol of Doriath. Éowyn, mother of Galadriel. Éowyn is known for one thing. She did not follow her husband into the exile of the Noldor, just like her friend and sister-in-law Anere, wife of Fingolfin. We don't know for sure when Éowyn was born. All we know for certain is that it was somewhere in the far west in the Year of the Trees. In YT 1280, she was married to Finarfin, with whom she bore many children, one of which is the main lead in today's video. Yes, it's finally time to crack open the Twin Towers and travel to the Golden Wood. Galadriel. Galadriel was the Lady of Lothlórien, or Lórien, and a minor character in Frodo's journey to take the ring to Mordor. She helped him decide which path he wanted to take and gave the Fellowship gifts to help them on their journey, which included her 3 strands of hair for Gimli, advice regarding seagulls to Legolas, boats for the Fellowship of the Ring to take them to their destination, and an old vial filled with light to Samwise Gamgee, who helped him journey through Mordor with Frodo. In the Hobbit movies, specifically The Desolation of Smaug, we see Galadriel use her immense powers and the power of the ring she held to drive the necromancer who was Sauron in disguise away from Dol Guldur. She was also part of the White Council we meet in The Hobbit, An Unexpected Adventure, where she trusts Gandalf's suspicions that something wicked was stirring in Middle-earth once again. Galadriel has telepathic powers and a magic pool, along with political sway in the Elven kingdoms, which makes her a powerful character to contend with. In the show Rings of Power, we see her role in the Second Age, where, according to the show's lore, she was responsible for getting a stranded Sauron back to Arda from Numenor, thinking him to be a king of men in the east. While many in the fandom ship her with Gandalf, Galadriel is actually married to another elf lord, Celeborn. Celeborn was the Lord of the Golden Wood and one of the few elves to stay in Middle-earth for a short while at the start of the Fourth Age of Men. In the Third Age, he was considered one of the wisest elves in Middle-earth, and in the Second Age, he played an important role in the War of the Ring, where he defended Lothlórien and led the assault on Dol Guldur. Let's take a closer look at this elven icon. Celeborn was an elf of Doriath, kin to King Thingol, who was his uncle, and he also married the granddaughter of Thingol's brother. Celeborn married Galadriel after he had fought in one of the first battles of Middle-earth, named the First Battle. While Galadriel had come with the Noldor, she wanted to see Middle-earth and rule her own realm. Narrowly escaping the drawn sack of Doriath, Celeborn began to mistrust the Dwaro. Yet, after he fought in the War of Wrath, Celeborn decided to stay near the Blue Mountains with his wife, Galadriel. Eventually, they began to move east during the Second Age since the lady felt unease with the growing presence of evil that she could sense and felt she had to oppose. This led to them staying near Moria, where Celeborn would not enter due to his mistrust of Dwaro. And that means we've entered the period where Rings of Power is set. Are you excited? This is where Sauron came to the couple and their young daughter in the guise of an elven smith called Anatar. Interested in the various forms of Sauron? Well, we have a whole video on that. Did you know he was once a werewolf and fought Luthien herself? You gotta hand it to Professor Tolkien, his world is tightly knit. These are some big shoes for the writers over at Amazon Studios to fill. Like, how are they planning to show the host Celeborn led to fight Sauron, who managed to hold the Dark Lord off till Elrond arrived from Lindon with reinforcements? Sure, the combined forces of the elvish warriors still lost, but eventually, with the help of men, Sauron would be forced back into Mordor, and Celeborn would go to Rivendell to help strengthen their defenses, showing his military and strategic strength. He fought in several battles during this time, and eventually, after many years of living in the last homely home, Celeborn and Galadriel joined his daughter and Elrond in matrimony, which led to 3 grandchildren that you know we're going to look at later in this video. While they still fought Sauron, the true test for this couple seemed to be Moria's Balrog, especially since this creature led to the domino of events which would leave Lothlórien without a ruler. Seeing that, Celeborn and Galadriel returned to the Golden Wood and took up the position of its rulers. Despite his distrust of the Dwaro and some initial ruffled feathers, when the Fellowship came to Celeborn and Galadriel's realm, Celeborn welcomed Gimli. After defending their land from the forces of Sauron, and once the One Ring was doomed to the fires of Mount Doom, Celeborn and Galadriel went and destroyed Dol Guldur and took part of the region as East Lorien. And guess what Grandfather Dearest said to his new grandson-in-law? That he wished Arwen would stay with Aragorn till the end, unlike him and Galadriel, because Celeborn knew that the time had come for his wife to depart for the Undying Lands. He was sweet enough to call his wife and granddaughter his treasure. What a softie. Honestly, we're just ignoring the fact that him and his wife are kinda related, which probably isn't the best scientifically, but maybe elf biology doesn't rely on DNA? If you know the answer, let us know in the comments down below, otherwise we're just gonna chalk this one up to a little elfin incest. Now that we know Galadriel married a man who was a whole green forest, except for his thing with the Dwaro and extended family, let us look at the other men who might have played important roles in her formative years. Yes, her brothers. Finrod. Finrod Felagund was the eldest brother of Galadriel and the king of Nargothrond. He was considered one of the noblest elves of their house and was especially considered a friend of men. He also saved Beren and opposed the Oath of Fëanor, which allowed him to return to Valinor, making him elf numero uno to be reincarnated in the Undying Lands. Perhaps this was because of his loyalty to his family, which took him to Middle-earth during the exile of the Noldor, but which also kept him from partaking in the kinslaying of Alqualonde to the extent that he was fully unaware of that travesty. Here's a fun fact. Finrod, he founded the original Minas Tirith. No, not the same Minas Tirith that stood against Sauron and was the pride of Gondor, a kingdom of men, but the original Minas Tirith, the one that the men of Gondor called Minas Anor. He also discovered, and with the help of the Dwaro, built the Blue Mountains, leading to him getting the title Hewer of Caves. Not only this, but this elf's list of accomplishments includes being the Prometheus figure for the men of Middle-earth, and in his many adventures, gave the House of Beor the same ring that generations later would be used to tell Aragorn his true identity. Not only this, but Finrod actually died for a man, Beren, from the story of Beren and Luthien, after fighting a wolf barehanded to save his companion. Also, he was loyal AF. He loved an elf named Amari, who did not come to Middle-earth with him, and so he did not marry in Middle-earth at all. Talk about a green forest, huh? No wonder the Valar granted these two eternal life in the Hall of Mandor, despite saying that none of the elves who went into exile would be allowed to enter the sacred halls. Now that we know where Galadriel learned what to look for in a partner, let us see what her other brothers were like, shall we? Angrod. The middle child of the family, Angrod met with King Thingol to gain his permission to establish realms in Beleriand outside the king's realm. He was allowed to enter Doriath because of his mother's lineage, and he held the place safe against Morgoth till his death in Dagor Brogalac. Yet he's not known for his valor alone, but also the legacy he left behind, which would eventually result in the Elven king Gil-galad. Agnor. Agnor was the brother who died alongside Angrod. His is a heart-wrenching tale, for despite being a bachelor, he had a woman he loved. A wise woman named Anderth, in fact, yet it was wartime and he passed before he could make his intentions clear. Despite this, the two lovers left behind an intellectual legacy, for they spent long hours discussing the fates of the children of the Valar. These conversations are fully explained in the Athrabeth Finrod a Andreth. Well, we've covered Galadriel's maternal line, but what of the legacy she left behind? Her children and grandchildren who would go on to play major roles in the Third Age. Yes, it's time to look at the ancestry of Arwen, daughter of Elrond, starting with her mother and Galadriel's daughter, Celeborn. We know that Celeborn was born in the Second Age and would eventually go to Rivendell, where she would fall for Elrond and wed him. There, she would have twin sons, Elladan and Elrohir, followed by her daughter, Arwen. Yet, this story is a tragic tale. If you're wondering why we never see the Lady of Rivendell in the movies or the books, well, the answer is orcs. In TA 2509, Celeborn was abused by orcs in the Misty Mountains when she was going to visit her mom and dad. This resulted in a poisoned wound which Elrond healed, but her mind and spirit remained tormented. Haunted by the memories of her torture, she eventually sailed west the next year, an event that left its mark on her sons. Elladan and Elrohir. The twins of Elrond are characterized by the fandom as funny pranksters, but in canon, they never forgot how their mother was tortured by orcs and often rode out with the Rangers of the North to take down orcs and other servants of Sauron. These two grandsons of Galadriel were technically half-elven due to Elrond's ancestry. Not only did they rescue their mother from orcs, but they were there on the last raid Aragorn's dad went to, resulting in the future king and his mother seeking shelter in the last homely home. In the events of the Lord of the Rings, the twins would scout the path for the Fellowship, which begs the question of how the events of Boromir's death happened. Well, the twins eventually split up to follow the Grey Company and Halabard, which is how the orcs got the drop on the Fellowship, but eventually they reunited with Aragorn and were there through his journey through the paths of the dead. On the fields of Pelennor, they fought with stars bound to their brows. They also seconded Gandalf's battle strategies and fought at the Black Gate, after which they were seen escorting Arwen to Gondor under a banner of silver. Beyond that, they stayed in Rivendell after their father Elrond left for the Undying Lands. Not much is known beyond them hosting their grandfather at Rivendell. It remains to be seen whether they still reside in Middle Earth or left for Valinor. And now that we know what his sons are like, let's take a moment to revisit Lord Elrond. Not as the Lord of Rivendell who helped form the Fellowship of the Ring, or even as the father of Arwen, who, in the movies, stopped her from being with Aragorn, or even as the mentor of Estelle, who helped raise the future king of Gondor. He was also the son-in-law of Galadriel, and that's the capacity we're going to examine him in today, as well as the role he played in the history of Arda. Elrond. Elrond was the great-grandson of Luthien and Beren, born in the refugee of the Havens of Sirion in the First Age, before the sons of Fëanor would sack the place. After this, Elrond and his brother are assumed to have traveled to Lindon after they had been raised by Maglor, one of the two who sacked their home. Despite a rocky start, Maglor would come to love the boys, and considering the sons of Fëanor were working alone in the War of Wrath, we can assume this is where the two elven boys escaped or were let go. At the end of the First Age, the half-elven were given the choice to take the gift of men or stay immortal. Elrond, as fans know, made the second choice and stayed the herald of Gil-galad. When the war with Sauron came, Elrond was sent with a host, but he arrived too late to defeat Sauron, as we mentioned, and thus returned to Lindon with Celeborn, with much help from the army of Durin II. Perhaps inspired by this, or for other reasons, Elrond would go on to establish Rivendell at the foot of the Misty Mountains in the next 2 years, a place where many notable travelers would stay, including Bilbo Baggins and the company of Thorin Oakenshield in the Third Age on their way to reclaim Erebor. Yet, when Rivendell was first established, Sauron would attack it for 4 years straight, until the men of Numenor would arrive and throw his forces into the jaws of defeat with the help of the forces of Gil-galad. Then, Elrond hosted the first meeting of the White Council, meeting his future mother-in-law Galadriel. Here, the decision was made to hide the 3 elven rings of power. Also, for our romance fans, this is where Elrond met and fell for his future wife. After this, Elrond rode with the last alliance of elves and men and was instrumental in the defeat of Sauron, after which he married Celebrion and started his family. After Celebrion was lost to him, he would go on to host the line of Isildur until Aragorn would reclaim Gondor. A huge part of this was Elrond's ability to see into the future. While in the movies, it seemed that Elrond was against Arwen and Aragorn's love, in the books, he was merely sorrowful, as he knew the choice to get betrothed to Aragorn meant that Arwen would give up immortality, and thus decreed that she would only make that sacrifice for the King of Men. In The Lord of the Rings, Elrond would send riders to help Frodo reach Rivendell and then help establish the Fellowship of the Ring. After this, he advised Aragorn to take the path of the dead via his son, gave Arwen in marriage to Aragorn, and left for the Undying Lands. But what role did Arwen play in these stories? Was she a warrior, or a damsel in distress, or something else entirely? Let's take a look at the beautiful daughter of Galadriel, who was often compared to Luthien herself. Arwen. Well, some might get eked out by Arwen and Aragorn falling in love, considering he was the foster son of her father. The two actually met when they were both adults. Aragorn was 20, while Arwen had been alive for 2,700 years and was returning from her grandmother's realm of Lothlórien. It was love at first sight for the future king Elisar, who mistook Arwen for Luthien. Yet, the two remained apart for another 30 years until they met again in the Golden Wood, where Arwen bound her fate to that of Aragorn. While Elrond said he couldn't marry him until he became king, Arwen remained strong in her faith and gave him a banner to use during the war, which would eventually give him the strength to take on the paths of the dead. That same beautiful banner would be the first to announce the return of the king. After defeating Sauron, Arwen Elvenstar would become the Queen of Gondor, have several children, and, after a long, fulfilling life, die of heartbreak a year after the death of her husband, Aragorn. Now, we could look at Arwen's legacy, but don't you think this video is getting a bit too long? And we still have Galadriel's extended family, such as uncles and aunts, to learn about. So perhaps we can begin to wrap things up with them, though the first in that line is a character whose notoriety is known far and wide in Middle Earth, and for whom several videos might fall short. Uncle Fëanor. Fëanor, the uncle of Galadriel, was one of the most talented elves and made the Silmarillion. Yet, despite all his knowledge and skill, especially with metalwork and speechcraft, he couldn't find it in himself to love or trust the other children of his father, Finwë, and thus, when Melkor tried to poison him against them, Fëanor fell to the bait and raised his sword against his half-brother, Fingolfin. For this, he was banished and then visited by Melkor. Yet now, Fëanor was wiser to the lies of the Vala and didn't trust him, causing him to flee. Years after he had drawn his sword on his brother, Fëanor made a reluctant truce with Fingolfin, but that became a disaster when Melkor stole the Silmarillion and killed Finwë. Fëanor swore vengeance and left for Middle Earth. Using his impressive words, he swayed many of the Noldor to his side, even if his speech had accidentally fallen into the lies of Melkor. Then, realizing the only way to secure ships to journey to Middle Earth would be getting the ships of the seafaring Teleri, Fëanor attempted to convince and guilt them into giving him ships, but eventually drew his sword on them, leading to kinslaying, for which all the Noldor, except Finarfin's host, were doomed by the Valar. Yes, these were the same Teleri that were related to King Thingol and were ancestors of Galadriel. They were also told that, being elves, they didn't have the power to defeat a Vala. Yet, Fëanor proceeded with his plan, despite his house specifically being cursed to hardships due to his oath to protect the Silmarillion at all costs. Stubborn, thy name is Fëanor. Beyond this, he also betrayed Fingolfin by burning ships instead of sending them back to help Fingolfin's host reach Middle Earth, something that would have led to a civil war had Fëanor's son and his friend, the son of Fingolfin, not intervened. Fëanor fought in the Battle Under the Stars and defeated the forces of Morgoth, but was eventually slain when he pursued them to Angabad. Despite realizing that no force of Noldor could beat the Vala, he bid his sons take revenge and get the Silmarillion back before his fiery spirit left his body, turning it to ash. This last oath resulted in 2 more kinslayings and much more misfortune on his line until it was ended by the hands of Sauron. Well, at least his sisters were wiser than him, huh? Aunt Irame. The fate of Galadriel's aunt named Irame is not known, beyond that she was not part of the exile of Noldor. She was born during the noontide of the Valar. Yet, unlike Fëanor and Fingolfin, their sister did not partake in the rebellion of the Noldor. Aunt Findis. Findis was the sister of Irame and is assumed to have stayed in Aman as she stayed in Valinor while her siblings went to Middle Earth and the exile of the Moldor. Not a lot is known about her, but now it's time for the final leaf on our family tree. Fingolfin. Fingolfin was the uncle of Galadriel, whom Fëanor resented because he was tricked by Melkor into believing he wanted to steal his Silmarillions. This led to Fëanor drawing his sword on his younger brother, which brought Melkor's lies to light. Yet Fëanor was still banished, which eventually led to the death of their father. Around 12 years later, the two brothers reconciled, yet were attacked by Melkor's forces, after which the Silmarillions were stolen and Finwë was killed. When Fëanor left for Middle-earth, Fingolfin reluctantly followed with a host as he promised to defer to Fëanor's authority as king and didn't want to leave his people alone with the unpredictable elf. This was a disastrous move, as by the time Fingolfin's host caught up with Fëanor, they were already in a fight with other elves, the Teleri. Thinking the Teleri had attacked Fëanor and his host, Fingolfin attacked the Teleri and accidentally became part of the kinslaying. They were cursed, and then Fëanor's host burnt their ships, betraying Fingolfin and his people and increasing the resentment towards Fëanor. Fingolfin's host decided to continue towards Middle-earth instead of returning to Aman in disgrace, and the trials and trails they faced made them feel even worse about Fëanor. The host finally reached Middle-earth, and a civil war would have broken out if not for the friendship between the sons of Fingolfin and Fëanor, which led to Fëanor's son declaring Fingolfin king, making him the first High King of the Noldor. These combined forces were able to quickly establish mighty kingdoms in Beleriand and constantly repel Melkor's attacks. Yet, after 400 years of siege, Melkor's forces attacked. Fingolfin's kingdom in Hithlum managed to barely defend itself thanks to the mountains protecting the kingdom from Morgoth's volcanic magma. Yet, seeing the total defeat of other elven kingdoms, a distraught Fingolfin challenged Melkor, who, despite being mightiest of all things in this world, hesitated before coming to answer the challenge as he knew fear. Yet, he had to accept the challenge lest his captains think him a coward. Many times Morgoth attacked Fingolfin, but the Elven King managed to dodge all of Morgoth's blows and even wounded the Dark Lord 7 times until he grew tired and Morgoth threw him into the ground thrice. Despite getting up each time he was knocked down, eventually Fingolfin the Wise stumbled backwards into a pit and Morgoth stepped on his neck and killed him, ending his tale of glory. Yet, the Elven King managed a strike that would leave the Dark Lord limping for all time, even as he lay dying. A marvelous review! Fans of Lord of the Rings know that Galadriel is one of the most powerful characters in the franchise, but many forget the place she comes from and gets her powers from. With storied ancestors like Fingolfin and Fëanor, as well as descendants like Arwen in her line, it's no wonder that Galadriel's family appears to take a major role in inciting or stopping evil in Middle-earth. Which other characters' family tree should we cover next? Perhaps the heroes of the line of Durin? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. This is Wheezy249 signing off for now, but you can always find me on Twitch, and until next time, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.